Trump sees China as an existential threat to the United States and global security, and this administration is full of China hawks who also think that. If Trump can end the war in Ukraine, maybe this North Korea-Russia relationship will end. Trump's decision to attack proved him to be a decisive president who means what he says.
Diagwitz, Daniel Manning with Japan Forward.
Mizuki Okada, the journalist of the Sankei newspaper.
We're joined in the studio today by Mr. Fred Fleitz. Mr. Fleitz is the Vice Chair of the America First Policy Institute Center for American Security. He has served in high-level national security roles, including as Chief of Staff to the first Trump administration Security Council. He's a former CIA analyst, and he has also served as a senior official with the House Intelligence Committee. He brings decades of experience in foreign policy and intelligence. So, Mr. Fleitz, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Yeah, and thank you so much for joining us. And it's a very great honor to have you back, and welcome back to Tokyo.
It's great to be with you again.
Yeah, I interviewed you last summer, so just happy to see you again.
It was almost a year ago, and we were talking about what a Trump administration would look like.
Yes.
And now we can talk about how much of what we discussed turned out and how accurate it was.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into the first question with regard to the ceasefire between Israel and Iran after the U.S.'s massive bomb attack against Iran on the Iranian nuclear sites, and then U.S. President Trump announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. And what's the next step? All eyes on this, I think. And so what kind of conversations will the Trump administration try to have with the Iranian regime, and how can Iran be convinced to abandon its nuclear program? And are there any specific countries or the international institutions that are willing to cooperate with the United States? How do you think of this?
These are all very important questions, and I think it's well known in Japan that many of the president's supporters were concerned that the president wouldn't get involved in a military conflict like this because he ran as a president to keep our country out of unnecessary wars. But what he explained was that this does not mean he will never use military force or get involved in a war if it is in the interests of our country to do so. And he gave Iran 60 days. The Iranians did not negotiate in good faith. He then gave them another 2 weeks to negotiate an agreement. They met with the Europeans, refused to negotiate in good faith. And what I mean by that is that they tried to drag out the negotiations, and the Iranians refused to give up the uranium enrichment program, which is clearly part of a nuclear weapons effort. So Trump's decision to attack proved him to be a decisive president who means what he says. And I think that's going to give him leverage in dealing with the Iranians and also with the heads of state of other countries who are U.S. adversaries who are not friendly. I think it will give him leverage in dealing with the Russians and with the Chinese. Where this goes from here, I'm hoping that the Iranians will come to the negotiating table, will agree to a reasonable deal. And Trump has offered them an excellent deal. They would be allowed to have a peaceful nuclear program, which would give them fuel for a reactor and for a power reactor, research reactors, and nuclear medicines. But they have not been willing to give up their enrichment program. That's why an agreement wasn't possible. I hope they rethink that. I'm concerned that this radical Islamist regime will never negotiate in good faith, and there will not be a reasonable solution to this problem until the government leaves office or is overthrown. So what I think the likely outcome will be, if negotiations don't succeed, I think Iran's influence and power has been greatly diminished by the Israeli and American attacks, and leaves the potential for the U.S. to promote peace agreements and stability in the Middle East without Iran interfering, meaning the Abrahamic Accords might be strengthened. Maybe there's new potential for ending the Gaza war, but hopefully this will reduce the Iranian regime's potential to sponsor terrorism, to meddle in regional disputes, to send weapons to their proxies, such as the Houthi rebels. I think it will end up being a good thing. I don't think the best outcome, that is Iran agreeing to a peace agreement, is likely, but the administration is going to push for that.
And since you have plenty of experience and expertise in the field of intelligence, and I'm very curious about your view on the Mossad, with regard to the Israeli attack against Iran and the role played by Mossad in intelligence, Israeli intelligence, that was quite notable. And you have plenty of expertise with the CIA. So how do you view the role played by Mossad this time, and does this impact force the future forms of warfare?
I think that's a very perceptive question that people are not talking about, and it goes to how Israel carried out this remarkable attack on Iran, and the Mossad was a key here, because the Mossad has recruited a large number of sources inside of Iran. They have been able to convince members of the Iranian government, including the Iranian military, to defect and to act as sources. And we know of instances where fake messages were sent to Iranian military officials to meet in a certain secure location, and then the Israelis bombed that location and killed all the generals. A lot of that was because of human intelligence provided by Mossad agents, and these Mossad agents were Iranians who were defecting and were working for the Israeli government. Mossad was able to carry out pinpoint strikes on the apartments of Iranian officials, Iranian generals in Tehran, with attack drones that were smuggled into Iran and assembled. There actually was a base operating these attack drones inside of Iran. It was a remarkable intelligence operation. It shows the incredible expertise and professionalism of Mossad and the unbelievable incompetence of the Iranian government, Iranian intelligence. To imagine that these Israeli intelligence agents are running around Iran and the Iranian leaders didn't know it, it's remarkable. And on top of that, and this goes to the biggest mistake Iran made, both in terms of biggest strategic mistake, biggest intelligence mistake, and that was deciding to fire missiles at Israel. Because by doing that, they gave Israel an excuse to respond. And when Israel responded, it had an opportunity to test Iran's air defenses, and discovered they were extraordinarily weak, weaker than anyone knew. There was always an assumption that Iran had some pretty powerful air defense systems that they bought from Russia. They did have some of them, not as many as people thought, and a lot of them didn't work, and the ones that worked, the Israelis figured out how to take them out. If Iran had not done the foolish thing of attacking Israeli territory directly with missiles, Israel would not have known that, and I don't think it would have risked this attack. This was crucial intelligence that Mossad analyzed to find out what are the weaknesses in Iran's defenses in case Israel wanted to attack. And after the Israelis discovered that, and then remember, Israel attacked twice, Iran attacked twice. Each time Israel attacked and demonstrated that it had the capability to hit any target in Iran, the Iranians didn't seem to take that seriously. That was a fatal mistake. But the biggest mistake was attacking Israel at all, because it gave Israel intelligence that enabled the recent Israeli attack to succeed.
So just turning now to the implications and connotations for Japan that this the situation in the Middle East has now. Given Japan's relations with Iran, Japan receives 80% of its oil from the Middle East. Do you think there's any capacity for Japan to help in the de-escalation of the current tension?
Now, the government of Japan took a different approach to the American attack than some other governments like Australia and the UK. They didn't endorse it, but they didn't condemn it. They called for a de-escalation. They would like to see peace in the region, and I understand that. I think that is an approach that the Iranian government will take in the future, but if Iran and if Israel has any leverage in negotiating with the Iranians, that's needed right now to encourage them to do the right thing and not to escalate, not to start making nuclear weapons again. not to launch terrorist attacks. We have to have every state who has any influence with the Iranians to do the right thing right now. And if Japan can help, I'm concerned that Japan is seen as so close to the United States that the Iranians will not listen to Japan. But if there's a possibility they will, I hope the Japanese government will pursue that route.
Okay, and given all the talks, or threats rather, about closing the Strait of Hormuz, do you think Japan should dispatch its self-defense forces to secure its oil lifelines?
My understanding is that will not happen because China has told Iran not to do that. And Iran doesn't have any real friends right now. I think China is probably its closest friend. And I don't think that friendship is terribly strong because the Chinese haven't done much to help the Iranians. But my understanding is China does not want the straits to close. I don't think this is the type of dispute that Japanese self-defense forces should get involved in. But I also don't think the straits will be closed. I believe Iran is there may be an escalation by Iran, there may be attacks on American forces, but it looks like that's not what Iran is going to do.
Okay, so in your opinion, do you think that the recent airstrikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities, do you think that sort of enhances deterrence, or do you think that might possibly push regimes like North Korea to double down on nuclear weapons? Do you think there's still room for diplomacy with regimes like that, or should Japan and the US just be focusing on deterrence now?
I think it does increase deterrence. I think it will discourage Iran from escalating. I don't know whether they will ever make a diplomatic agreement to lower or normalize tensions, but I think that America sent a clear message to the Iranian regime, and it will be stabilizing to a great extent. But concerning North Korea, which has an estimated 40 to 80 nuclear weapons, we don't know how many, North Korea has already crossed that red line. They already have built a nuclear arsenal. They may have miniaturized nuclear weapons that could fit on missiles that could be fired a considerable distance. So my hope is that this is not going to have an effect on the North Korean government or their nuclear program, and that can be addressed separately by the Trump administration.
Okay, and on the topic of North Korea, during the first Trump administration, Trump met with Kim Jong-un and he raised the abductions issue. How likely do you think it is that the Trump administration will be able to arrange a second meeting with Kim Jong-un? And do you think it's possible that this time the issue will be advanced?
I believe Trump is determined to engage in personal diplomacy with Kim Jong-un again. There are currently efforts at different levels behind the scenes to encourage the North Korean government to do that. So far, it looks like it has not been willing to do so, but the U.S. is still pushing forward. The problem is that the North Korea situation is different than when Trump left office in January 2021. North Korea perceived significant American weakness under Joe Biden, especially after the disastrous U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, which led the North Koreans to resume missile testing. This began in the fall of 2021, and in 2022, North Korea tested more missiles than it ever did in its history. It fired, I think, 2 missiles over Japan and demonstrated a solid-fueled ICBM, which is a severe threat to U.S. national security because such a missile theoretically could carry a nuclear warhead and be launched so quickly that it may not be easy to intercept it. So this is a significant threat to American national security. It happened under Biden. It makes it harder to negotiate with North Korea. The Biden administration ignored North Korea. It didn't have a special. The North Korea special envoy from the U.S. was part-time. This man was also ambassador to Indonesia. Wasn't even there the whole time Biden was in office. And North Korea also has a new, strong relationship with Russia that is related to North Korea providing arms and soldiers to fight in the war in Ukraine. And Russia's providing cheap energy, probably economic assistance, and probably missile and satellite technology to the North Koreans. And we all know that North Korea's satellite program is an ICBM program. It's a fraud. So Trump will have to get beyond that to resume negotiations. If Trump can end the war in Ukraine, maybe this North Korea-Russian relationship will end, and getting diplomacy rolling will be easier. But there are a lot of issues that have to be resolved before this happens. I'm certain the abductee issue will be featured in any talks between Trump and Kim, because Prime Minister Abe was so clear to Trump about what a crucial issue this is to the Japanese people. Trump has not forgotten that. Even at the recent G7 summit, Trump was talking about his old friend, Prime Minister Abe, and how much he misses him. And I am certain this will be an important aspect of any talks that resume between Trump and Kim.
Just circling back to something you mentioned a second ago about the relationship, the new sort of strengthened relationship between North Korea and Russia. All the troops, or most of the troops that North Korea has sent to Russia, they seem to be dying like flies, which might suggest that they're almost being used by Russia as human shields. And last year there was also an issue of Russia sending grain to North Korea that was like the expiry date had passed, like it was already 2 years old. Do you think things like that, these elements might put that new friendship under pressure?
I haven't heard those reports. I have heard reports that North Korean soldiers did not fare well in Ukraine at the beginning, and that maybe they were being used by the Russians as what we might say cannon fodder. I've also heard that the North Koreans have sent very disciplined troops and are using the war in Ukraine to learn lessons of modern warfare, including drone warfare. It's bad for global security for North Korean troops to be in Ukraine. We don't want North Korea to gain this battlefield experience. Yes, they're losing lots of troops, but they're gaining experience in this war. And that's why this has to be stopped. We really need to find a way to pressure Russia and North Korea to get those troops out of there.
Japan is currently enhancing its military capabilities. I know you wouldn't speak for Trump, but in your opinion, what do you think he expects of Japan in that respect? Is Japan doing enough beyond its current commitments? Or can you think of anything that Trump would ask of Japan?
Well, it seems that Trump and his advisors would like Japan to do more in terms of defense and to prepare for a new era of increasing threats from China. And we've heard a variety of statements by Trump and his advisors that Japan should be spending more on defense. I think we're going to hear this over and over again, because Trump supports alliances. I know people say he doesn't, but he supports alliances, but he wants our friends in alliances to carry their own weight and to play a leading role in defending their regions. And there will be pressure on Japan to spend more in defense. But the problem is, when Japan is asked to spend more in defense, Japanese officials justifiably say, we'd like to spend more in defense and buy weapons from the United States, but there's a backlog. The weapons aren't available. And I think that's a valid criticism that the Trump administration has to address.
Okay, so in that respect, do you think Japan should perhaps be producing more of its own military equipment as opposed to just constantly buying missiles from the US?
It should be doing both.
Okay, and just circling back to, you mentioned the threat of China. So as the US sort of stretches itself globally, do you think that could create a power vacuum in the Indo-Pacific that China might take advantage of? And if so, what do you think Japan could or should do to deter that?
There are some conservative American foreign relations experts who have talked about the concept of scarcity, and that we don't have sufficient defense resources to be involved in the war in Ukraine and also stand up to China. I don't share that. I believe that a global power like the United States has to be able to simultaneously handle serious conflicts around the world. And helping the people of Ukraine doesn't mean the US can't stand up to China. We have to produce enough weapons. We have to leverage what we have And we can do both at the same time. And having said that, it's fairly clear that the threat from China is the primary threat to the United States for President Trump and his team. So much so that there are some Trump advisors who believe that the U.S. should cut our relationship with Ukraine so we can divert these military resources standing up to China. I don't think that that's what the president's thinking. I can't speak for him, but that is an argument that we hear frequently in the United States among Trump supporters. If there is a shortage, if the scarcity theory is correct, which I don't think it is correct, that is not going to affect American policy towards China, because Trump sees China as an existential threat to the United States and global security. And this administration is full of China hawks who also think that.
Can I ask you something about the reciprocal tariff policy? And our economic minister, Akazawa, just arrived in DC today, and in order to have the conversations with Mr. Bessent. So, and many people say that it's not beneficial for the U.S., both U.S. and Japan, but also for U.S. allies. So, what do you think of reciprocal tariff policies of the Trump administration?
Well, I'm an expert on the Iranian and North Korean nuclear programs, not an economist. So I can only say so many meaningful things about this issue. I will say that for Trump, trade has to be free and fair. And I know there's been some tough times recently between the U.S. and Japan on economic policy, on President Trump's tariffs. But this is not directed at Japan. As you know, the U.S. is engaged in dozens of negotiations with nations worldwide because Trump wants to make trade fair and to address the problem that there are tariffs against the United States that we don't inflict against other nations. So that's where the reciprocal idea comes up with. Trump also wants to deal with structural imbalances, non-tariff trade barriers that makes it hard for the United States to engage in trade with other states. Things that the U.S. has tolerated for decades, Trump wants to address. In many ways, this really is a revolutionary U.S. presidency that has had 4 years to come up with some pretty elaborate plans to fix U.S. Domestic policy, foreign policy, and trade policy. But whatever the differences are we have with Japan right now, Trump values our relationship with Japan very much. He sees it one of our closest allies. This is a minor difference among friends, and we'll get through this quickly.
So forgive me if my understanding is off, but in the Obama era Iran nuclear deal, as far as I understand it, there were no clauses within that deal to ensure that Iran would not continue to produce weapons-grade plutonium after 2025. So in that respect, do you think that this situation was inevitable regardless of whether it was a Democratic or Republican administration?
Well, President Trump has called this agreement, the JCPOA, the worst deal ever, and there were many reasons for that. Even when the deal was in effect, the restrictions on Iran engaging in weapons-related activity were very limited. Iran was allowed to keep enriching uranium, which helped it perfect that capability. It had weak verification, which meant Iran was able to engage in weapons-related activity and not get caught. And we know that it developed advanced centrifuges while the agreement was in effect. But you make another very interesting point. The restrictions on uranium enrichment and fuel rod reprocessing, which is the process to make plutonium, was time limited. It temporarily slowed these nuclear activities, and they would be running out right now. But what I would argue is that even if that wasn't the case, Iran was engaging in plenty of weapons-related activities while the agreement was in effect, and some of them the agreement permitted to be conducted. So it was a terrible agreement. Trump was right to pull out of it. And if there's a new nuclear agreement with Iran, no uranium enrichment, no plutonium reprocessing should be permitted. Absolutely none. And if that's not the case, under Trump, there will be no nuclear agreement with Iran.
And again, just forgive me if my understanding is incorrect, but with the money that Iran received once the sanctions were lifted under that original nuclear deal, it used that money to train and fund groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi. and also to supply them with weapons. Is that correct?
It received many millions of dollars. No, I've forgotten the amount that it received under the JCPOA, but it was a huge amount of money, including $1.7 billion in pallets of cash that the U.S. quietly flew to Iran without telling Congress while the agreement was being finalized. But under the Biden administration failed to honor Trump's sanctions. Trump put over 1,000 sanctions on Iran. The Biden administration didn't honor most of them, especially the oil sanctions, and that oil, of course, was sold to Iran. Iran became $100 billion wealthier under the Biden administration because it refused to enforce these sanctions. This is money that Iran used to build up its nuclear program, its military program, and to help fund Hamas and its October 7, 2023 terrorist attack on Israel. So the Biden administration and the Obama administration made the same mistake in giving Iran revenue that it used to sponsor terrorism and destabilize the region.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Fleitz, for joining us today. It was a great and enlightening talk, and we hope to have you here again in the very near future.
Thank you so much.
Good to be here.